Hey Peyton, this is Dr. Scott, and I have some feedback for you on your rhetorical analysis draft. We talked a little bit about this essay already, but I want to follow up and give you some more specific feedback after I've had a chance to read it a couple times now. Just as a reminder, some of the issues that I'm looking for, some of the criteria that I'm using to evaluate the revision are the thesis statement, that it has a focused thesis statement that's addressing the use of rhetoric in the speech, and I know you don't have one just yet, and that's fine. I'm also looking for supporting evidence, and that evidence comes from research that you've done. It can also come from examples from the text that you're analyzing. I'm also taking a look at whether or not your research is credible and it's used to actually help out your argument rather than just used as filler in the intro or the conclusion. Also looking at the focus of your paragraphs and use of organization and transition. So there's a lot that's going on in this assignment. This is a draft, and we talked a little bit about it already. I know that you kind of set up on the one hand, he did these things well. On the other hand, he didn't do these things that well. The revision will need to kind of pick a side. Even if that side is, I think that there were, on the whole, I thought he was persuasive to his audience, but he missed some opportunities to persuade. That is totally fine. I think that works. So in the revision, most of your writing seems to be like it worked, but I think that there's some trepidation about how effective this is, or some concerns about whether or not he really made the impact that he had hoped for. But let me kind of go through and talk about my feedback as I go. I think for me it was difficult sometimes in the body paragraphs to understand what the rhetorical issue was that you were writing about. It's a draft, you're just kind of getting ideas down. And I think that that's absolutely fine for what you have so far. In the revision, it needs to be clear what the rhetorical issue is, and you need to know a bit earlier in the paragraph. Sometimes you would write, and I would get to a point and like, oh, okay, this paragraph's about logic, and what that does is it kind of forces me to reread the entire paragraph to kind of understand how things are connected. So this first paragraph is a good example of that. It took me a while to kind of figure out what this paragraph was really kind of about. And if you set up your paper to kind of like, first he does this and then he does this, you'll want to kind of rethink that and think about a different way to kind of organize your thoughts. It might be like he was most effective here, or he did this, he had to do this rhetorical move in order to open up other avenues for him. Some people have said that about his appeal to credibility, like when he emphasizes religion in the beginning of the speech, like that was purposeful. He had folks there that were not Black Muslims, they were Christians, and he had to acknowledge that at the very start of the speech. Otherwise, they wouldn't go along. They had some concerns about him, I think. That would be fair to say. So making it clear what the issue is in the paragraph, that's kind of an important thing to do. In the information that you have here, I think that you're mentioning frustration and anger, and you mentioned that a couple places in this draft, and I think that those are good things to write about. I think that they could stand alone as paragraphs. I think a paragraph about frustration, a paragraph about anger, these are two different emotions that he tries to appeal to, and those, you can use pathos in very different ways. So those two emotions are definitely there. He also you could write an entire paper about just emotion. He uses guilt and shame, like he makes fun of them for people that sit down instead of standing up. So like, making fun of sit-ins and walking. So I mean, he's using a range of emotions. He's trying to piss people off. He's trying to get them to kind of rethink how they're going about fighting for civil rights. So again, a paper just about emotion, that would totally work. There's also kind of like a logic that he has to some of these things. It's like an either or kind of logic, an us-them kind of logic. So, I mean, you have a lot of different things that you can do. Right now, it isn't clear where you want to go. It seems like you're trying to sum up at the end of the paragraphs and say like, yeah, I think that this is emotion. I think that kind of needs to be flipped. The clarity needs to be at the beginning of the paragraph. And the pattern that I'm suggesting to folks is tell us what the rhetorical issue is, give us an example, explain how that example works. Is that kind of rhetoric? How is this working as an emotional appeal? And then connect it to the audience. And the audience thing is really, for me, that's the big missing piece right now of the essay. It's we don't know. You mentioned Black audience a little bit, but there's not much detail to that, and there's no research about that. So that needs to be fleshed out in the revision. The second page, I kind of saw that as well. Like you mentioned logos at the very end of the paragraph. You mentioned that this is an issue of logic. Logic is absolutely, for my money, Malcolm X is really banking on this either or logic that he has. He presents listeners with two choices, and one is clearly a shitty choice. And so ballot or the bullet, or kind of an us versus them kind of thing. And so he kind of puts it in that stark, it's got to be this or this. And that stark contrast that he has, if he can get listeners to kind of go down that rabbit hole a little bit to accept that those are the only two choices, it's a really powerful rhetorical move. And he demonstrates a pretty solid understanding of the issues of politics at that time. And so it would seem plausible, I think, to folks that are listening in that audience in Detroit. Like, man, this guy really knows what's going on. He knows what's up, and he's saying it's either this or this, and it makes it pretty clear, and he makes it pretty clear which way that he would want folks to go. So there's definitely a logic here. Right now, though, again, kind of flipping the order is really kind of where it needs to go. It's like he uses an either or logic to persuade middle class blacks, including Christians and Muslims, to side with black nationalism. Okay, let's provide some examples, discuss how those why is that an example of logic, how does that persuade his audience, and then using multiple examples in a paragraph and kind of talking about the differences and the similarities between them. That's really kind of how you build some momentum for rhetorical analysis. In here, I appreciate the commentary, and I enjoy the commentary. I'm just kind of not seeing the pieces coming together as a kind of a coherent argument just yet about how he's using rhetoric. Like, I'm totally with you about him using the American Revolution and alluding to that. The question then becomes, like, why use that? Why use that for black folks at the time? Here you kind of write that it's about what our nation is based on. And I think, like, for black folks, I don't know if that's necessarily, like, I don't understand, like, why that might be specifically or uniquely relevant to black folks. It might be like he's saying, well, white folks can do it, so why can't we? I wonder if that's kind of the argument that he's going for. Anyhow, it takes me kind of rereading the paragraph to understand, like, oh, she's trying to go for logic here, and then I have to kind of flip everything and reread it. So making it clear what's going on at the beginning, providing some examples, discussing those examples, and then connecting them to the audience and making an argument about how effective you thought it was for those audiences. That's really kind of the thing to do. I see bits and pieces of it throughout the essay. It's just kind of bringing it together is really the next step. In this kind of wrapping up the last couple paragraphs, like this one here, there's quite a bit of it that feels like summary, like you're kind of summarizing what he's trying to get across, and I don't feel like there's much of a discussion about what the rhetorical issue is that you're taking a look at here. There was kind of some interesting ideas. Like, again, we get later into the paragraph and we realize that we're learning about pathos and emotion. And again, I think that you have something with emotional appeals. And again, you could write an entire essay that are just about the emotional appeals that Malcolm X uses. He ridicules people. He kind of makes fun of them for thinking a certain way. So, I mean, there's shame or guilt, or I'm not sure, ridicule. That's not really, ridicule is not an emotion, but shame and guilt definitely are. There's definitely fear in here. There's anger, frustration. He is tapping into all those things. And again, I think you can write an entire essay just about emotional appeals. There's also a lot of logic in here, and you're writing about that a little bit as well. So kind of thinking about what's the overall argument you want to make? I guess I'm kind of saying you need to kind of figure out what your thesis is to help you make decisions about what it is that you want to do. You mentioned the religion issue at the end, and the religion thing is kind of what he opened with, and I'm kind of curious, like, what your thoughts are there, like what that has to do, his discussion of faith. What's up with that? Where's that kind of, what place does that have in an essay where you have a lot of ideas about logic and you have a lot of ideas about emotion? I'm just kind of curious, like, what the religion discussion might help you do. I'm not sure just yet. So this is a long video to kind of say, I think you need to figure out the thesis, and I'm happy to help you with that. So if you want to chat later this week, if you want to email me some ideas, I can shoot some ideas back to you and give you some feedback. But I think kind of figuring out what's the overall claim you want to make, I think that's going to help you make decisions about what stays and what goes between this draft and the revision. All right, Payton, that's what I have right now. If you have any questions, reach out, let me know. But I did enjoy reading the ideas that you have down here on the page. It's just kind of getting things together for the revision. Last note, sorry. Here, there's this kind of us, them. If you want to go down the logic route, there's a contrast thing that Malcolm X does really, I think, effectively. You can make an argument that it's exclusionary, that it kind of misses some nuance. I think that there's different ways to take a look at this, but he does this us, them in these comparisons and contrasts that are just kind of stark. So he's comparing the United States against other countries. And that's part of logic as well. So you're mentioning things that you could kind of pull together to talk about emotion. You got some things you can kind of pull together to talk about logic. It's just kind of deciding where you want to go. All right, that is legit it. I will talk to you soon.